All done with step 1, on to step 2. We're going to create a form inside of our snippet create page. That is the page we made just a moment ago inside of our src app snippets new page.tsx file. So inside of here, I'm going to delete that div, and I'm going to replace it with a classic form element. This form element, we're going to add in a little bit of styling to right away just to make sure the form looks somewhat reasonable. This is going to require a little bit of styling because we're going to use Tailwind CSS to add a couple of different class names. So just bear with me for a little bit as we do a little bit of typing here. First, I'm going to add an H3. That's going to say create a snippet, and I will give that a class name of font-bold and im-3. I'll then place a div that's going to have a class name of flex, flexcol, and gap-4. I'll then place another div inside that with a class name of flex and gap-4. And then inside there, I'm going to place my first input field. So that's going to be a little label. Here's the mock-up. Little label that just says title, and then right next to it, I want to have my text area where a user can enter a title in. I'll place a label that says title. I'll give it a class name of w-12 and an HTML4 of title. Underneath the label, we'll put in an input. I'm going to give myself a little bit of space here because we're going to add a couple of different properties to the input. I'll put in a name of title, a class name of border rounded key-2 and w-full, and an ID of title. Then to save just a little bit of time, I'm going to copy that div right there with the label and the input inside of it. And I'm going to make a copy right underneath. So I've now got the title one right here, and I've got a second title one right here. On that second input, we're going to change the label to code. And I don't want this to be a plain input. I think it should probably be a text area instead, just to make it really easy for users to type code in there. So here's the second div that we just added in. I'm going to change first on the label HTML4. That's going to go to code. The label will say code. The name will be code. The ID will be code. And then finally, I'm going to change that input to be a text area. Finally, underneath that div, last thing we need to add in here, I'm going to put in a button element that, of course, the user can click on to submit the form. I'm going to give it a type of submit, a class name of border rounded p-2, and a BG blue 200. And you know what? Let's actually not add a border. Let's just keep that off. So we'll just do rounded P2 and BG blue. And we'll give that button some nice text. It could be submit, create, whatever you want. Let's just go with create. How about that? Okay, let's save this. Go back to the browser and see how our form is looking. All right, so right now it's a little bit wide. So we probably want to kind of constrain the width of our page. We can do that very easily, and we can make sure we constrain the width of all of our pages, remember, by making a change to our layout.tsx file. That root layout file inside of our project is used across all of our different pages. So to make sure that we kind of make sure the page isn't too wide, we can add some styling into our root layout, and that will affect this form right here and everything else as well. To do so, I'm going to go and find my layout.tsx file. Scroll down a little bit. I'm going to open up that body. Wrap children with a div. And then on the div, I'll apply a class name of container, mx-auto, and px-12. Let's look back over. And okay, still a little bit wide, but I think for right now, that'll definitely do. Now I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. So of course, you can see everything on my screen very easily. Okay, so now we can, of course, enter in some title, some code, and then click create. And you'll notice that the content out of those text input in the text area right there disappears. That's just the normal behavior of a form element inside the browser. So just as a very quick reminder here, the default behavior of your browser whenever you submit a form is to take all the values out of all the inputs in there, and then make a request to your backend server, and it's going to append a query string. You could see it right there. We added a name property to these two inputs, or I should say the input and the text area as well. Those name properties are used as the keys in this query string. So there's title right there, and there's code right there. And then the values for those query string values are, of course, going to be whatever we typed into these inputs. Just as a reminder, that is the default behavior of a form. And it turns out understanding that default behavior is going to become really important as we start to move on to our next step for creating a new snippet. Our next step is going to be to create something called a server action. And this has a very close integration with how forms behave. So again, just important to keep in mind what the default behavior of a form is.